I was sitting in that cramped waiting room on the third floor of the Dirksen building, counting the cash in my worn leather wallet for the third time, hoping somehow the numbers would change. $850. That was it. Everything I had left after rent, after groceries, after the transmission repair that had eaten my entire savings last month. The receptionist had already told me the retainer was $1,200, just to have the attorney review the documents I'd found in my mother's basement. I'm 63 years old, and I never thought I'd be in this position. Sitting in a lawyer's office, hands shaking, trying to figure out if my own brother had stolen my inheritance. But there I was, in my work boots still covered in warehouse dust because I'd come straight from my shift, holding a corroded metal box that might contain the only proof I had that everything my brother told me was a lie. Let me back up. My mother, Catherine, passed away 6 months ago at 79. Lung cancer. It took her fast, which in some ways was a mercy, but in other ways, it meant I never got to ask her the questions I needed to ask. My father, Robert, had died back in 1998 when I was 36, heart attack at 52. Too young. Way too young. He'd been a plumber, worked his whole life in Chicago, saved every penny he could. Back in the 70s, Dad had started buying properties. Small rental houses on the south side, nothing fancy. 2-bedroom, 1-bath places that working families could afford. He'd buy them when they were in rough shape, fix them up himself on weekends, and rent them out. By the time he died, he owned 4 properties, all paid off. They weren't worth much back then, maybe $30,000 each, but they were ours. Free and clear. After Dad died, Mom managed those properties herself for years. She was tough, my mother. Handled tenant complaints, fixed leaky faucets, collected rent in person every first of the month. I remember her coming home with cash in her purse, depositing it at the First National Bank on 87th Street. She'd write everything down in her ledger, meticulous records of every dollar in and out. My brother, James, was always the successful one. 5 years older than me, he went to college, became an accountant, married a woman whose father owned a chain of car dealerships. They lived in Naperville, big house, new cars every 2 years. Meanwhile, I'd bounced from job to job, got married young, divorced at 40, worked in warehouses, drove trucks, whatever paid the bills. I wasn't bitter about it. We just had different paths, or so I thought. In 2018, Mom had a stroke. She survived, but she was never the same. Her left side was weak, her memory got spotty, and she couldn't manage the properties anymore. James stepped in. Of course, James stepped in. He was the responsible one, the one with the business degree, the one Mom always trusted with important matters. He told me he'd handle everything, and I believed him. I was working 60-hour weeks just to keep my head above water. I didn't have time to ask questions. Mom moved into James's house in Naperville after the stroke. He and his wife, Patricia, converted their guest room. I visited when I could, usually Sundays, my one day off. Mom seemed comfortable. James seemed attentive. Everything seemed fine. When Mom died last October, James told me she'd left everything to both of us equally. 50-50 split. Sounded fair. Then he sat me down at his kitchen table, pulled out a folder, and explained that there was nothing to split. The properties had all been sold over the past 5 years to pay for Mom's medical expenses, her medications, her care. He showed me some paperwork, medical bills, statements I didn't understand. He said after everything was paid off, there was about $11,000 left. He'd give me my half, $5,500. I took the check. What else was I going to do? I didn't know anything about real estate or estate law. James was the smart one. James had always handled the money stuff. If he said the properties were sold, they were sold. But something nagged at me. Mom's medical expenses had been covered by Medicare and her supplemental insurance. I remembered because I'd helped her fill out the paperwork years ago. And those properties, even back in 2018, they were worth something. The neighborhood had been gentrifying. Young families were moving in, fixing up the old houses. I'd driven through there a few months before Mom died and seen for sale signs with prices that shocked me. Houses like Dad's were going for $300,000-$400,000. 3 weeks ago, I got the call that James had finally cleared out Mom's house and I could come get any personal items I wanted before he put it on the market. Mom had lived in the same house on South Justine Street for 46 years. The house where James and I grew up. I drove over on a Saturday morning, my truck rattling the whole way because I still hadn't fixed the exhaust. James wasn't there. He'd left the back door unlocked and a note on the kitchen table saying to take whatever I wanted but be done by 5 because the estate sale company was coming Monday. The house was mostly empty already. Furniture gone, pictures off the walls, decades of life packed up and hauled away. I walked through those empty rooms and felt like a ghost. My old bedroom still had the same closet door, the one Dad had rehung 3 times because I kept slamming it during my teenage years. Mom's sewing room still had the faint outline on the wall where her machine had sat for 30 years. I went down to the basement, where Dad used to have his workshop. It was dank and cold, smelled like mildew and old concrete. Most of his tools were gone, probably sold off. But in the corner, behind where his workbench used to be, I found a metal box, army green, about the size of a shoebox, with rust around the hinges. It had Dad's initials scratched into the top, RMK Robert Michael Kowalski. My hands were shaking when I picked it up. It was heavy. I carried it upstairs to the kitchen where the light was better, and I opened it. Inside were documents, property deeds, 4 of them. The addresses I remembered: 8,247 South Bishop Street, 8,319 South Laughlin Street, 8,156 South Throop Street, 8,402 South Loomis Street. All 4 properties, all in my mother's name after Dad died. But here's what made my heart stop. The deeds were dated, but there were no sale documents, no transfer paperwork. These were the original deeds, stamped and recorded, never transferred, never sold. Under the deeds were bank statements. Old ones, yellowed, from 2018, 2019, 2020. An account at First National Bank under my mother's name. Rent deposits. Every month, like clockwork. $1,200 from Bishop Street, $1,100 from Laughlin, $1,300 from Throop, $1,500 from Loomis. All deposited electronically, all going into this one account. The last statement was from January 2023, 2 years ago. Total balance, $247,000. I sat on that kitchen floor for 20 minutes, just staring at those papers. My mother had never sold the properties. The rent had been coming in the whole time. Where had that money gone? And why did James tell me everything was sold? I took the box. I took everything in it. I went home to my studio apartment in Bridgeport, and I laid it all out on my kitchen table, and I went through every single piece of paper. There were tax records showing the properties had been paid every year. There were insurance documents, still active policies. There were maintenance receipts, but they were minimal. Basic repairs, nothing major. These properties were still generating income. They had to be. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Not on my warehouse salary. But I had to know. I made some calls, got a free consultation with a paralegal who worked at a legal aid clinic. She looked at the documents and her face went pale. She told me I needed to hire a real attorney immediately, that this looked like fraud, possibly elder abuse. She gave me a name, Robert Chen, estate attorney, worked on contingency for strong cases. That's how I ended up in that waiting room, counting my $850, knowing I needed $1,200 just to start. Mr. Chen's office door opened. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, wire-rimmed glasses, tie loosened around his neck. He looked at me, then at the receptionist, and she must have said something because he gestured for me to come in. I sat across from his desk and I told him everything. I showed him the documents. He went through them slowly, methodically, making notes on a yellow legal pad. When he got to the bank statements, he stopped and looked up at me. "Mr. Kowalski," he said, "do you know what these properties are worth now?" I shook my head. He turned his computer monitor toward me and pulled up a real estate website. He typed in the first address, 8,247 South Bishop Street. The house popped up. Recently sold, the listing said. Sold 3 months ago for $2.1 million. My vision blurred. That can't be right. He pulled up the second address. Sold 2 years ago for $1.8 million. The third address. Sold last year for $2.3 million. The fourth address. Still listed. Active rental. Current estimated value, $2.5 million. I couldn't breathe. I literally could not catch my breath. Mr. Chen came around the desk and made me put my head between my knees until the dizzy spell passed. Your brother, he said quietly, has been selling these properties and keeping the proceeds. The one that's left is probably still generating rental income that he's collecting. Mr. Kowalski, we're talking about approximately $8.7 million. I threw up in his trash can. When I could speak again, I asked him what I needed to do. He told me the retainer was $1,200 for this type of case, but that he'd work on contingency if I could pay $300 today as a good faith deposit. I gave him everything in my wallet, except $50 for gas to get home. The next 3 months were the worst of my life. Mr. Chen filed a lawsuit against James, citing fraud, elder abuse, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. James hired a team of lawyers from some fancy firm downtown. They tried to argue that Mom had given James power of attorney, that he'd had the right to sell the properties, that the money had gone to her care. But we had the evidence. We had the bank statements showing rent deposits continuing for years after James claimed the properties were sold. We had the property records showing James had transferred the deeds into his own name using forged signatures on quitclaim documents. We had testimony from Mom's doctor saying her medical expenses had been fully covered by insurance and Medicare, that there'd been no significant out-of-pocket costs. The day we deposed James was the day I saw my brother clearly for the first time in my life. He sat across the conference table in his expensive suit, his lawyer whispering in his ear, and he looked at me with contempt. Not guilt, not remorse. Contempt, like I was the problem for questioning him. You've never understood business, Tommy, he said. Mom needed care. I provided it. Those properties were a burden. I managed them. I earned that money. You told me they were sold to pay her medical bills, I said. You lied. I simplified the situation for you because you couldn't handle the complexity. You stole $8 million. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, told him not to answer. But I saw it in James's face. He didn't think he'd stolen anything. He thought he'd earned it. He thought because he was the smart one, the successful one, the one who'd gone to college, he deserved it more than me. The case took 8 months to resolve. James's lawyers dragged it out, filed motion after motion, trying to wear us down. But Mr. Chen was relentless. He brought in a forensic accountant who traced every dollar. The properties James had sold, he'd pocketed the full amount. The rent from the one remaining property, depositing into his personal account $4,500 a month for the past 6 years. James had also filed fraudulent tax returns, claiming the properties as his own, deducting expenses, collecting depreciation. The IRS got involved, the state's attorney got involved. What started as a civil lawsuit turned into a criminal investigation. In June, James pleaded guilty to 3 counts of felony theft, 2 counts of elder abuse, and 5 counts of fraud. The deal his lawyers cut kept him out of prison, but just barely. 5 years of home confinement with electronic monitoring, 10 years probation, and full restitution. He had to pay back every dollar, plus interest, plus penalties. The 3 properties he'd already sold couldn't be recovered, but their value had to be paid to me from his assets. He had to liquidate his retirement accounts, sell his house in Naperville, sell his cars. His wife filed for divorce 2 weeks after the guilty plea. I heard she got the boat and the vacation condo in Wisconsin in the settlement. The 4th property, the one on Loomis Street, was transferred back to me. It's worth $2.5 million now. I kept it as a rental. It generates enough income that I quit my warehouse job. Last month, I got a check for $6.4 million. That's what was left after legal fees, after taxes, after accounting for the property I kept. $6.4 million. At 63 years old, after working my entire life for hourly wages, barely scraping by, I'm a millionaire. I bought a house, nothing fancy, but it's mine. 3 bedrooms, a garage where I can finally have a workshop like Dad's. I set up a scholarship fund at the community college in Mom and Dad's names for students studying the trades. Plumbers, electricians, carpenters, the kids who work with their hands like Dad did. I also hired a private investigator to track down the families who'd been renting those properties. James had raised their rent every year, sometimes twice a year, squeezing them for every dollar while providing minimal maintenance. I found 12 families who'd been displaced when James sold the properties to developers. I gave each of them $10,000. It wasn't enough to make up for what they'd lost, but it was something. James and I don't speak. I don't think we ever will. His lawyer sent a letter asking me to write a character reference for his sentencing hearing. I declined. You don't get character references from the people you steal from. I think about Dad a lot these days. He died thinking he'd set up his family for security. He'd worked himself to death buying those properties, fixing them up, managing them. He'd trusted that his sons would take care of each other, would take care of Mom, would do right by the legacy he'd built. James betrayed all of that. He saw an opportunity when Mom got sick, when she couldn't advocate for herself, when she couldn't check the bank statements or question where the rent money was going. He saw me as too stupid, too busy, too poor to notice, and he almost got away with it. If I hadn't gone to Mom's house that Saturday, if I hadn't found that metal box in the basement, I would never have known. James would have kept the money, kept collecting rent on that last property, and I'd have been working in that warehouse until my body gave out, thinking my mother died with nothing to leave behind. The box is on my mantle now. The old army green metal box with Dad's initials scratched on top. It sits there as a reminder that the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes it hides in basements, behind workbenches, waiting for someone to find it. And when you do find it, when you hold that proof in your hands, you have a choice. You can walk away, pretend you didn't see it, avoid the confrontation and the pain. Or you can stand up and fight for what's right, even if it means going to war with your own blood. I chose to fight. And I'd make that choice again, every single time. The thing about family is that we want to trust them. We want to believe that blood means something, that shared history creates loyalty, that the people who sat at the same dinner table and shared the same last name will have our backs when it matters. But sometimes family is where the deepest betrayals happen, because family knows exactly where you're vulnerable. They know what you have, what you don't have, what you won't question because you trust them. James knew I wouldn't question him. He counted on it. He built his entire plan around my trust, my exhaustion, my lack of sophistication about finances and real estate. He thought I'd take my $5,500 check and be grateful. He thought I was too dumb to figure it out. He was wrong. My niece, James and Patricia's daughter, called me 2 weeks ago. She's 28, works as a teacher. She said she didn't know what her father had done until the criminal charges were filed, that she was ashamed, that she understood if I never wanted to see her again. I told her she wasn't responsible for her father's choices. We had lunch. She cried through most of it. She asked me how I could forgive. I told her I hadn't forgiven James. I don't know if I ever will, but I wasn't going to punish her for his sins. She's my brother's daughter, but she's also her own person. She gets to write her own story. That's what I'm doing now, writing my own story. For 63 years, I let other people define me. My brother, my ex-wife, my bosses, my circumstances. I was the loser brother, the divorced guy, the warehouse worker barely making rent. I accepted that identity because I didn't know I had another option. That metal box gave me an option. The documents inside gave me proof, and the proof gave me power, and the power gave me the ability to rewrite the narrative. I'm not the loser brother anymore. I'm the man who stood up to fraud, who fought for justice, who honored his parents' legacy by making sure their hard work wasn't stolen by someone who thought he deserved it more. Sometimes I wonder what Dad would say if he could see how everything turned out. I think he'd be disappointed in James. I think he'd be sad that his sons ended up in court, that the family he tried to build fell apart over money and greed. But I also think he'd be proud that I fought. Dad wasn't the type to back down from a fight, especially when he knew he was right. He taught me that, even if it took me 6 decades to remember the lesson. The properties are rented now to good families. I screen tenants carefully, keep the rent affordable, maintain the houses the way Dad would have. I walk through them sometimes, running my hand along the banister he installed, checking the plumbing he ran 45 years ago. Most of it still works. Dad built things to last. I'm building something now too. Not houses, but a different kind of legacy. The scholarship fund will help kids who want to learn trades, who want to work with their hands, who might not have money for college but have talent and drive. The money I gave to those displaced families. It won't bring back what they lost, but maybe it helps them start over somewhere better. And I'm living, really living for the first time in years. I'm not working myself to death anymore. I'm not counting pennies, hoping my truck makes it one more month. I have time. I have resources. I have choices. That's what James stole, when you get down to it. Not just money, though it was a staggering amount of money. He stole time. Years of Mom's life when that rent money could have made her comfortable, could have paid for things that would have brought her joy. Years of my life when I worked brutal hours because I thought I had no other option, when my parents' legacy could have given me security. James stole our choices. And when you steal someone's choices, you steal their freedom, you steal their dignity, you steal their ability to determine their own path. I got some of that back. Not all of it. You can't get back time, can't undo years of struggle and stress and grinding poverty. But I got justice. I got accountability. I got proof that the truth matters, that fighting back matters, that standing up to powerful people who think they're untouchable actually works sometimes. If you're reading this, if you're hearing this story, and something about it sounds familiar, if you have a nagging feeling that someone in your family isn't being honest about finances or inheritance or what happened to your parents' assets, trust that feeling. Don't let people make you feel stupid for asking questions. Don't let them intimidate you with complicated language or fancy degrees or the implication that you're too unsophisticated to understand. Get the documents. Hire an attorney, even if you have to scrape together every dollar you have for that retainer. Fight for what's right, even if it means fighting your own family. Especially if it means fighting your own family, because that's often where the worst theft happens. And keep the proof. Keep those documents somewhere safe. You never know when a corroded metal box in a basement might be the key to everything. I sleep better now than I have in years. Not because of the money, though financial security certainly helps. I sleep better because I know I did the right thing. I know my parents would be proud. I know that somewhere, Dad is looking down at that scholarship fund, at those maintained properties, at the families living in houses he built with his own hands, and he's smiling. That's worth more than $8 million. That's worth everything.